I have just got the old spinning disk. Is this usually a thing? Jake, you chaired it last time.
It's started now. You can go.
Oh, I've still got the grey sort of recording thing. Doesn't matter. There we go. Now I've got the tone. That's what I wanted. So yeah, hello everyone. Welcome to the cert-manager biweekly meeting. There's not a huge amount on the agenda today, so there's a good chance it will get done in time. There's going to be some interesting discussions. I think the first things first is to go around and do some introductions. Certainly, I can do the easy ones, which is myself, Jake, Josh, Yerbe, and Mayo and Matt Bates. We're all from JetStack, which is we all either work full-time on cert-manager or have a vested interest in people who do work full-time on cert-manager. I recognize a couple of people, and Alan, I don't recognize you. Oh, there's James. So yeah, anyone who I didn't just list, including Richard, sorry, anyone who didn't just list, if you'd like to pipe up and introduce yourself, please feel free.
Hello, everyone. So
Hey.
maybe I can go first.
Sure.
Okay, so my name is Alan, and I work at Rakuten in Japan. So I work at Rakuten Mobile, and I work as a machine learning engineer. So yeah, so maybe I'm kind of interested in cert-manager because I was working on Kubeflow, and it's one of the requirements. So I just landed on it 2 weeks ago, and I thought it would be useful if I can look into it. Yep. Nice to meet you all.
Nice to meet you, too.
Hi, everyone. Me and Akbar are joining from Amazon. We have been coming to these meetings a few times now just to talk about the AWS PCA issuer, which is listed as one of the external issuers. Yeah. Nice to meet you all.
Nice to see you again. Hi, Akbar. James, I suspect most people probably know you, but do you want to say hi?
Yeah, hi. I'm James. I used to work at JetStack and helped start the cert-manager project. Thought I'd come along. I'm now working over at Apple, so joining just to kind of check in, see how everything's going, and yeah, see everyone again.
Good stuff. So, with that done, I don't think I've missed anyone. As Josh falls victim to the terrible Google Meet UI. Let's move on to the first thing. Actually, I think first thing we should maybe do is the PCA issuer updates. Don't see why not. The CSR stuff that we'll do later could get quite in depth. So we start with the PCA stuff. Param, would you like to say anything about that?
Sure. I guess the major update from our side is we have the unit tests and integration tests are all merged in. So we have added the instructions to the README file itself. Like anybody who's using this plugin can download and now run the unit test and integration test. And it actually creates the AWS resources. It creates CA, and you can do end-to-end certificate issuance using this plugin. So it's more of an end-to-end test suite in addition to unit tests that we have added. So the second part of it is it was so I was looking at the issue number 3670, which talks about the infrastructure for CI testing using Prow cluster. So we were wondering like how we can onboard with this Prow cluster and run these unit tests and integration tests as part of like continuous integration as we get more pull requests and automate the same.
Jake, that's your issue. Do you think you could say something on
that? Yeah. So I haven't seen your. I didn't have a chance to look at your tests just yet. But I guess all we'd need is AWS credentials.
Yep.
because we can't just pay for PCA issue, the PCA.
No, that's completely fair, and I guess the key thing here is we can figure out internal with our marketing team like how we can get access. So internally, we were told that CNCF itself has credits allocated from AWS that we can use for this project. So I was not sure like who all we can connect to and figure out like how we can get those existing AWS credits for this purpose, or maybe we can create a new account internally under the same umbrella.
Okay, so it sounds like we're in the middle of three things, because maybe Matt has an update on moving to the CNCF, but we're going to move the repo as soon as legal sign off, and then rebrand all of the Prowl, because right now it's JetStack Prowl, but we'll rebrand it to cert-manager Prowl. So yeah, we're kind of in the middle of everything. So if you're ready, then it's back on us.
Okay, sounds great. So we did internal testing with one of our local like Docker and Docker test cases, and we are able to make run tests by supplying the AWS creds. So these are running end to end on the Docker. So I think it shouldn't be a problem. It should be just about creating a PRAO configuration which can access this repo, and we can just mount it and get the test going. So at that point, we can have the CI up and running.
Sounds great. So do we have an update, Matt, on legal?
It's sort of imminent. This is what all lawyers say, right? They, it'll be with you this week. But we're pretty close. I think the Linux Foundation lawyers and our lawyers are kind of just talking about the final agreements to be signed and everything else. And once that's the case, I mean, we're sort of kind of in the CNCF. If you notice, we're on the CNCF project page. But I think in terms of the repo, that's one of the final things to move across, I think, in the domain, and perhaps a couple of other things. But yeah, we're pretty close. So yeah, I would say imminently, and the plan is hopefully to be in time for 1.4. We shall see, but it's in the order of weeks now, we should think.
I think 1.4 release date is 11th of June. That's the time frame.
Maybe possible. Yeah. I'll check in. See where we are.
So Jake, what I understood is from this one that we have to wait for like until 11 June, until the project is moved under CNCF officially. At that point, we will be able to onboard with the PRAO. Is that what we are leaning towards?
Well, I think we can like create a configuration before then.
Mm-hmm.
It's just we just have to work out how we'll pay for it.
Sure, and I guess I can work internally to figure out an account that we can use for short term for running these test cases, and then later we can use the accounts under CNCF if that works. So I can figure that out on ourselves.
That'll be super useful, because then if we have an account, we can just write a job definition to run it in our PRAO.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds good. I guess we should open a GitHub issue probably on the cert-manager side to track this, where we can communicate. And Akbar is on our side who's writing these test cases. So he can provide more details about how these test cases are run. And we can figure out like the PRAO configuration job for the same.
Sounds good. Yeah, so yeah, if you make an issue on cert-manager, I'll pick it up and like put a job configuration in, and then we'll work them on your side, work out how we can pay for it in the interim, and then we'll come back in the next meeting and try and get CNCF account for it.
Sure. Sounds great. So the other thing is, since now I think the last thing pending on the list on our side was adding unit test and integration test. So since they are checked in, so last item was to actually initiate the transfer. So we can start working on it. And I know Johan is not here today, but I can reach out to him offline. So we can figure out a date when we can actually click the buttons from both sides and start working on it. And meanwhile, our plan is to run these unit tests and integration tests manually on every pull request to make sure nothing is breaking these test cases until we have CI system up and running.
Sounds good. Yeah, I don't think I see a reason why we couldn't transfer it now. I don't know if anyone else knows of any reason, but I think we could probably move the repository to the cert-manager organization. I don't know how we would schedule doing that. I suppose.
I think write the trial job first, then move it.
Okay.
Then that doesn't have to line up with the cert-manager repo move, because that's just a. But then I assume the cert-manager repo move happens, and then we work out how to make CNCF give us some Amazon accounts for running the
Sure.
tests.
That sounds great. So, Jake, one question. So once we hit transfer from our side, like who is going to accept it? Is it like any of the maintainers can accept it? How does it work? Sorry, I've never done it.
I think any of the owners of the cert-manager org, which is most of us, can accept it.
Okay, that sounds great. So let's talk on the issue, and then we can sync up. And once the job is in place and we have the creds from our side, we can hit transfer from here. So I think that should be good.
Yeah. Great. The first real donated project.
Sounds great. And I guess from the last meeting notes, we were talking about adding the plugin maintainers to the security contacts list so that if there are any security issues, you know who to reach out to regarding this plugin. So I know we started discussion on the cert-manager Slack channel as well. But are there any updates on the same? Like how are we going to handle it? Because I guess at this point, we can update the security context.md file just to list few of our email addresses and right next to this plugin so that you guys know whom to reach out to if something happens.
That sounds reasonable. We didn't sit down and discuss explicit. Hi, Micah. We didn't sit down and discuss anything explicit in terms of like how people will get added to the actual cert-manager security advanced reporting process. That's not been written down, but certainly, yeah. In the short term, I don't see anything wrong with adding you guys to a security contact thing, and as long as there's a point of contact we can reach,
Yep.
Anything relevant we can certainly pass along.
That sounds great. And we can share an email address from our side, which you can add. And Micah, probably we need to work on our side as well, like what that email address looks like that's shared between our teams for the long run. Yeah, but I think
for what Kubernetes and some other projects have done for this is on the security context file in the repo. For that, like if there's a specific issue in a repo, then you know the folks on the security at cert-manager would ping them for a fix, but then separately contact distributors, and so that distributors list might be where we'd have in AWS's case a shared inbox with our security team that's responding 24/7 to stuff. But yeah,
that all sounds reasonable to me. In terms of where we go from here, so what would be the next step? I guess if we have we don't have a list for reporting in pending fixes to distributors yet. That's not a thing we have yet. There's been some more chat about that, and I think it would be a useful thing to do, but I suspect that's not going to get started before 1.4. I don't think there's much chance of that, which that comes out on the 11th of June.
I'm sorry, I joined a little late. I guess where is in the process is the moving the cert-manager domain to the CNCF Google Group Management? Is that in process, or is that still have to be done?
We discussed that a bit before you joined. It's just it's not far off was the update there.
Okay.
It's still entangled with lawyers.
Okay. After that's done, then that's going to be probably really straightforward to set up a distributors list.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think it will be a huge piece of work, but I do know that most of the current maintainers are busy with 1.4 stuff at the moment. I suspect there's not the bandwidth for it.
Totally makes sense.
Cool. So in terms of security fixes for the PCA issuer repo itself, if any people on Amazon side can add themselves to a security contacts file on that repo, I suspect no one's ever going to get an email about this, are they? More than likely, but if there's just an email there, that will be good enough for now. And yeah, we should. There's no real blockers in the future here.
On our side, I'm sure that that's going to be fine as long as we have a path to getting to have a distributors list eventually.
Yeah, it's definitely in the pipeline. It's just a case of getting there. I say after 1.4, I imagine it's a thing that won't take too long to do. Is there anything else on the PCA issuer that anyone wanted to discuss? I take the silence to be a no, and the next thing. So there's 2 items left on the agenda. There's the Upstream Kubernetes CSR resource, which Josh and I have both been sort of working on, and there's a discussion about Artifact Hub vulnerability scanning, which is something that was highlighted to us in our internal Slack. I suspect the CSR thing is well, I not just suspect, I know the CSR thing is more important, so we might as well move to that. There's an in-progress PR, which is a good reference point for this, which Josh raised. As far as what the discussion on this is going to be, I'm not sure. Josh, I don't know if you wanted to say anything about the progress that's being made here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can take it away. So I wanted to have a kind of focused discussion on what we wanted to do over the next few releases. I don't particularly want to diverge the conversation to like implementation specific things like annotations here or whatever there. I more want to talk about kind of architectural stuff and the kind of what we wanted to do to move forward. So maybe from my perspective, what I'd like to see is in 1.4, we have a experimental flag which allows the addition to turn on certificate signing request controllers, and as a minimum, let's say only implements one issuer. Let's say at 1.4, let's say the CA issuer, because that's the most easiest to do. So yeah, that's what I wanted the conversation to kind of be about, that people were happy with this approach. Yeah, and then we can talk about implementation specific things on GitHub, basically. So the idea here being that we add an experimental flag where we can begin to kind of build up our implementations of the certificate signing request controllers, hash out those details, and then in X releases and with the not the expectation, but with the power of like the authors, us being able to kind of potentially have some breaking changes over the development of these controllers, not with the intention, but with the kind of privilege to, and even potentially remove that feature away in future if we didn't think it was appropriate or we change our minds about it. But the expectation is that in X releases, we would then be in a position where we could, for example, switch a flag, or not switch a flag, but change the code so that we completely replace the certificate request controllers with the certificate signing request controllers. So that's what I wanted to talk about. I don't know if anyone has any immediate thoughts on that approach. Yeah, so the idea here is to basically unblock ourselves, start writing code, yeah, and kind of build towards getting to this kind of idealistic future where we kind of replace the resource. Yeah. Lazy consensus? Yes. Cool. Brilliant. So quick.
Yeah,
Just
I
wonder-
mean,
Just wonder if anyone needed any context about what this actually is.
Sure.
before,
Yeah.
we
Maybe
can
that
do
was
it.
probably a little bit helpful. Sorry. Yeah, that was very bad of me. So yeah, maybe to give some kind of larger context. So some time ago, maybe over a year ago now, I think I remember it being 0.11, if I'm not mistaken, of cert-manager. We introduced a new resource called certificate request, and this was an effort to break out the certificate controller. So it made just split out the code basically to make it more manageable. And it also, and a certificate request basically represents a single certificate signing request, like an X509 certificate signing request. And the byproduct of this also meant that we could implement external issuers as well, which is obviously very relevant for the kind of conversation at the start of the meeting. Upstream in Kubernetes, they had kind of a legacy, I guess you could call it a legacy resource certificate signing request that's had some work over the years. And that operates very similar to our certificate request resource in that it's kind of a one-shot Kubernetes object which represents an X509 certificate signing request. And as a project, I think it's still, at least that conversation can still be ongoing. It makes sense for us to align, or we have been aligning with that resource anyway, but to completely replace our certificate request resource with that one. So there would only be kind of one agreed upon global certificate signing request object in Kubernetes. Yeah, so it just kind of made sense as the cert-manager project to move to that. There are some like tricky bits with moving to that object. The main thing is namespacing. So the kubecSR resource is a cluster scoped resource. Certificate requests are namespaced. I think that particular issue has caused a lot. It's problematic for us basically, which is what's kind of held us back from migrating to that resource for so long, and why it's taking long to kind of have the discussions of the migration, whether the migration will happen at all. And yeah, so I think that's a bit of background.
Yeah, it's super useful background as well. I think it's worth highlighting that, as happened in the stand-up, that the approach here currently is to have a new controller which listens for these upstream CSR resources, and there's no conversion happening between those and certificate requests one way or the other, which jumped out at me first. It's jumped out at Richard in the stand-up this morning, but it introduces permissions issues, I guess, is the short way to say it.
Yeah, so there's two main reasons. So the first one, which I think is compelling, but others kind of disagree, is that we don't want to proxy the resources. The reason why we don't want to proxy the resources, that is if a user creates a certificate signing request resource that is intended for some kind of cert-manager issuer, that we create a certificate request resource, which you can do the one-to-one mapping. The reason not to do that is, number one, you're duplicating resources, which causes overhead against the API server, which I think is a pretty valid point, and I think that is a concern. And also number two, which maybe is the most compelling thing, is that it breaks the identities. So just like the upstream Kubernetes CSR resources, cert-manager also attaches user info fields to certificate request resources. And just like the upstream Kubernetes CSR resources, we've also implemented kind of approval and denial and these kind of things. So it's in context of a kind of approver or implementing some kind of policy engine. What resource, like, we create a certificate Cube CSR resource, it gets created into a different request resource. Which one is approved? Which one gets denied? What happens as one approves, one gets denied? Does cert-manager have the responsibility to copy the approval from one resource to the other? It becomes just a complete mess. Do you proxy the user info fields? Yeah, it all becomes kind of magic and messy and just horrible. So yeah, that's the reason not to completely just copy the request, copy the resource into the other one.
To loop back to your initial thing, Josh, on like the approach for beginning to actually develop and implement this and experiment and start making progress, though, I'd just like to say like a +1 to what you're saying, and I think it makes sense to implement this like standalone within cert-manager, but standalone, not modifying existing controllers and components, so that you've kind of got a lot of flexibility without having the fear of potentially something leaking through and touching code that is on a non-alpha code path. So I think that is a very sensible approach. There's a lot of design considerations to think about and to prove out as it is, that I think doing it this way will then show and give us some experience on it. And then when it comes to kind of like the longer term approach of how do we deal with the transition from one to the other, I think that's a conversation that could then happen further down the line as well. But yeah, I think definitely isolating this, not trying to create I mean, it's not even so like the idea of a shim or a proxy, I think is actually something that's almost separate from the discussion on how we start approaching this today. I don't think a shim or a proxy is necessary today because we're not trying to provide that pass-through support. We don't want this code path at all to be invoked for the 99% of users. That 1% are the 1% who know what they're doing. They know they're opting into features that may go away, that are experimental, and it's pretty much the audience is the likes of us, really, and the customers and the people that we work with. I think for now, yeah, big +1, I think, to your approach. I'm also going to have to drop off, so I thought I'd just say that because I've got a half-past call.
Nice to see you.
Yeah.
Hello,
Thanks, James.
Bye.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like this is proving to be a particularly controversial point of the of the meeting. Like,
I mean, I could argue the toss, but
please do.
is now the time? I don't know. I haven't got my thoughts straight. I'll turn my video on. Sorry, I'm in the kitchen, so. But maybe I understand. Maybe what James has just said has helped make it a bit clearer. Is that so? The controllers you're writing for this are kind of prototypes for what the controllers will be when we adopt the upstream CSR resource. So the proxy approach doesn't really get us anywhere. Is that a reasonable summary?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
It's almost like the proxy is something else, and actually we can look at whether that's a good or bad thing later. But like at this stage, just having an experiment, effectively like an experimental controller that can be iterated on, that's with no guarantees around, or whether it will remain, makes a lot of sense. So people kind of opt in effectively and use it.
I'm personally not in favor of adopting the upstream CSR resource. I think I've said that before, and when I spoke to James Westby in my one-to-one, he seemed to agree.
Just confusing, or
to me,
confusing having
the
two?
cert-manager CR resource should be the bleeding edge version of what we want Kubernetes APIs to eventually look like. It seems like a backward step for us to have to adopt their API with all of the cruft and baggage that goes with it. I mean, so the reason their API is not namespaced is unclear, right? There's no real good reason, and so we're losing our advantage of having a namespaced resource by adopting their API. Is that true to say? That's what I think to myself.
I think that would be fair from my point of view, from my perspective. I think I share your sentiment, Richard. I'm not jumping up and down to completely replace everything. I think the main motivation for me is the integration. I think a lot of projects, let's say, for example, Istio, that's just a random example off the top of my head, will integrate with this resource very happily because it's integrating with Kubernetes and it's doing that anyway. The kind of activation energy or the kind of ability to have that kind of integration between two Kubernetes plugins, I don't see it happen quite that often. I think maybe Open Service Mesh, let's say, is like a rare example. And for that reason, I think it's quite a compelling thing to do, just so that cert-manager integrates with more things first class.
Is it fair to say that there's no strong consensus then on saying today that we will eventually migrate to using certificate signing requests everywhere? Thanks for
everyone. Yeah,
I think so. That's my opinion.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'd assumed, but I do see in the design that we have, it does explicitly say that that is the end goal.
Yeah, that's on purpose. So the intention of the language there is that that design document is a work in progress, and the language in there will change over time, but the language needs to be like it needs to have a statement, right? As to be, like a final decision. Whether that decision changes over time or whether new commits change that language, but the language needs to be like very certain. Was my intention there.
Wait.
That's good to know.
I mean, we get to learn, don't we? Sorry, we get to learn. I mean, effectively, we put it out. We see how it's adopted. We learn, and we decide whether that's like the direction of travel, effectively. And we always watch how the Upstream certificates API may perhaps can it iterate further. It can it? I guess it can have additional fields.
Yeah, they could always release v2.
There's like there's like the requested hint not after field, for example, that's in flight.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
But that's still an open pull request, right? And that was written quite some time ago. And that's just the nature of Upstream Kubernetes, I think.
But could it ever become namespaced? I think that's quite a drastic change.
No, it'd have to be a new resource.
Yeah. The reason it's not namespaced is just because it was only ever designed for nodes, and then they decided that nodes aren't namespaced.
Of course.
But it's kind of unfortunate.
I do agree with Richard, though. The fact that RCR is namespaceable is a real advantage.
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate that Kubernetes secret stuff isn't in the kube system namespace rather than not namespaced.
Yeah, great.
That's the wrong button, sorry.
I've got two of you, Josh.
Yeah, you've sort of frozen with a demonic face on your other one as well. So, is it fair to? Is it worth us updating the design document then with maybe saying that we're not? So I understand why it's currently prescriptive and why it says we'll aim to move to using CSR only. Should we update it now to say we intend to support CSR when it points at a cert-manager issuer, but we're not explicitly aiming today to end up there where we use it for everything?
Is it not the case? Was it not James Munley who said like a couple of meetings ago that if we don't, that some of the work that we have done would by now would have not made any sense if we hadn't replaced it? That's what we are kind of working towards. Or
which work specifically?
I guess not the user fields. The identity is for policy as well, I guess, so it's not that important for this.
I would say though, isn't it useful to be able to sign things which are not just cert-manager IO signers, right? I mean,
How do you mean? Sorry.
I'm just thinking. No, I take the point back. Sorry, no. I mean, you can just. I mean, at the moment, the CA issuer is the one that we're proposing, not way to put it into 1.4.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
to kind of.
things we can do in time, I guess. It's kind of it. I think there is an argument with the
Yeah,
CSR. Yeah, there's the argument to be made with the CSR resource that like it's not a CRD, therefore you don't have these dependency issues. For example, like signing nodes and things like that, and order of operation.
I think there's something here which I'm not 100% clear on, which is how one bootstraps a cluster in the first place if you don't yet have certificate generation in place. So I understand one of the advantages of this piece of work is that people could create CSRs before they install cert-manager, and cert-manager could then pick them up after cert-manager is installed. But in terms of sort of bootstrapping the cluster, your kubelets need certs, both server and client certs, to be able to do their work, right? So there's a chicken and egg problem here, where you like how is that chicken and egg problem broken? I guess is my question. Like, do you have to specify? Do you have to generate some certs ahead of time and say all the kubelets have to use this cert, and then after you've got the cluster up and running, you install cert-manager, which then goes and issues them?
Can you?
Yeah, I think sorry, go on.
Well, I did that experiment, didn't I? I'm trying to remember what I did. The kubelet that runs in a kubeadm cluster, the kubelet that runs the control plane components it connects slightly differently than the other kubelets. And what I did is I ran the cert-manager on the control plane node so that it could sign the CSRs for the worker nodes that we're joining.
I believe there's something called the bootstrap token.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the
and the
bootstrap
kubelets can
token
use it.
allows them to make the CSR request.
Yeah, so there is already a working kubelet with a bootstrap token, and it will ask for a certificate, and you can approve it, or anyone can approve it. So like the chicken is the bootstrap token, but then you're supposed to, once you have the bootstrap token, you're supposed to try and replace it. You don't stay using it for very long.
Sure.
Somewhat tricky for the control plane nodes, though. Yeah, the control plane itself, if you're bootstrapping the PKI for that. But I mean, you could well have like a different architecture there, couldn't you? With like a management cluster, for instance. It's elsewhere.
That's I think our cluster API uses cert-manager. No, I think they have it in
the pivot, where it pivots from a bootstrap to a camera. I can't remember what they call it, but it's something like that, isn't it?
GKE also uses kind and the scenes to do that bootstrapping. And it would install things such as cert-manager, which will sign the control plane certs. And
that's it. The GKE on-prem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's right. That's good.
That's interesting.
So, possible, yeah.
So would we do the proxy might still be done. The proxy approach might still see the light of day, and would we do that fairly soon or not? So I'm saying that because James and someone else just now said the proxy mechanism would be another piece of work. It's a separate piece of work. Is that true? Would we?
I think
Would we still do it?
the steps as I see them is the first things we need to hash out all the implementation details. I think we've just kind of got consensus on what we're going to do today. Then now we need to kind of concentrate on, are we going to implement a self-signed certificate signing request controller, or what does this annotation do? How are we going to handle the subject access review in the webhook for referencing a namespace issuer and those kind of things? I think that needs to be kind of hashed out. I see that as like the next conversation to have
Right.
after that's all done. Is my feeling towards it anyway. I don't know.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable to me. There's probably some parts of the design document that are worth updating in this context, so that we're all working, singing from the same sheet. That's the idiom, right? But yeah, there's no alarm bells being rung by anyone here about the approach we're taking, so that's good. Yeah, I don't want to go into the self-signed thing in detail here, because I don't necessarily think that will be a huge amount of help to anyone. I did write a really long comment on it, so if anyone has thoughts on it, shout. We may well end up actually ended up implementing this thing just because we feel we have to for CSRs. But I guess I don't think anyone will ever use it, so it would probably be our last priority, and every other issuer is a higher priority than that one. Because yeah, I don't think it's useful, even if we do end up doing it.
Do you not think if someone tests it, that's going to be like the first thing they'll actually be using, because it's the easiest to spin up?
It's not though. That's if you're using it with CSR, you need to generate a CSR manually on your machine and a private key to be able to use it in the first place. Like, the only reason it works for cert-manager proper is that you can create a certificate and cert-manager will do the heavy lifting for you. But with a CSR resource, you have to do it all. You have to fire up OpenSSL anyway, and you end up you end up using OpenSSL, so you're sad. That's the way things go. Yeah, I don't think it needs to be. I don't think I need to beat a dead horse on that one. Anyone have anything else to say about CSR resource? Is it implementation?
Non-controversial things are controversial. The controversial things are non-controversial. That's what I'll say.
Yeah, software engineering, right there.
How does the cert-manager CLI command, which creates you a certificate on your laptop? Is that an example of something that creates a CR directly? And might that generate a CSR directly?
Yeah, I think we purposely made that non-specific. So I need to check the actual.
Is this the kubectl plugin?
Yeah, so you can do CTL create certificate request or CTL create CR. So we can easily do a CTL create CSR or certificate signing request. So yeah, we should extend that as well as part of this work.
That's a good point. I'll add a comment noting that on the design document, I guess. I'll do that now.
That's a good reminder as well, Touchy, when testing stuff.
Of interest, have there been like any more? Maybe I haven't followed. Have there been like any more signals from like anyone upstream about this whole work? Like we talked about what I think Mo said or something like that.
I've not heard anything. I guess that's a no. The design document has been pretty quiet since like late February, early March. So maybe it'll pick up a bit more if now there's work going on it, because it was in the pipeline.
Yeah, the approval API and user info fields and stuff like that was a bit of a dependency on this work, I think. So.
So, any more on the CSR stuff? No. Alan, if you're still on the call, was there anything you wanted to discuss or bring up?
No, not particularly, but I think it's just kind of like I was thinking about like starting off just knowing about the project, and in the near future, probably maybe contribution in terms of working on it. But otherwise, it's like the initiation of the project on our side, and I'm kind of interested in the project. So yeah, but so far, I'll just be catching up to see what's going on. Yeah.
I'm still fairly new to the project myself, so we're in a similar boat there. It's great to have you join the call. Are you in our Slack channels on the Kubernetes Slack?
Not yet, but I think I will do that in the course of the week. So I just wanted to get the feel first from the call, but yeah,
Sure.
so I think I'll join. Yeah.
Oh, it'd be great to have you as part of the community. Welcome.
Right, thank you. Thank you.
And yeah, feel free to reach out to any of us in the Slack channel as well if you've got any questions about anything.
Yeah,
okay.
definitely. Thank you.
The last thing on the agenda is something I put on there really quickly this morning, which is about Artifact Hub vulnerability scanning. It was raised in our internal JetStack Slack by Z. You mentioned that Artifact Hub has this stuff now. This is the tweet that he linked to about it. And so I guess what I had to say on this is initially I looked at this and thought, well, we use distroless base images and this won't find anything because there's nothing to find. Like there's not much in the image itself. And then I looked a little bit more and there was this issue raised, which in which there was a vulnerability scan run on the Acme solver image, and it found issues. And they're not vulnerabilities, but it did catch that the image was out of date and needed to be upgraded. So I was actually pleasantly surprised that actually this kind of thing will catch it. It's not going to catch a vulnerability. I don't think there's anything that it would reasonably catch, but it is catching useful stuff. So there's maybe cause to have it. Having said that, it's not like a huge priority or anything.
I also thought the distroless images contained nothing. Well, I unlike you, I thought they contained nothing, but yesterday I read that they do contain the CA bundles.
Yeah,
that's one very good reason to keep them up to date, I suppose.
Yeah,
or
yeah.
we should compile in those CA bundles into the cert-manager release rather than rely on what distroless put in the image.
So it's interesting because basically the distro list contains TZ data and CA, but I think in Go 116 you can embed all of those in the binary. So maybe using a scratch base image and embedding them in the binary is better.
That's an interesting thing to consider, yeah. That would be good.
I mean, all that would do, that would guarantee that no container scanner would be able to find anything.
Does this mean that we would bundle like internet CAs into the cert-manager binary? All right.
Yes.
Trusto.
I'm not so. That might cause issues for people using it in enterprises.
How does that work? Is is that like a well-supported thing? So like the interface when Go looks up sys CA bundle or whatever the call is, it also looks at that location? Or on run, does it like write to a file, or how does that work? If that made any sense.
Is it like the test data thing where it's a, I suppose it's not, we're not looking up a relative path, but perhaps it intercepts calls for certain paths.
So I think it's this, which is inspired by the Go 116 this, which basically means you can embed the CZ data so that your binary works in a Scratch container, but then someone just took exactly the same code and changed it so you can embed Mozilla's root certs. I don't know whether that overrides it.
I never really thought of the concept or the issue before, but I guess it's true for most Docker images that are used, is that you can't use the same version forever because it will eventually become out of date because the CA bundles included will become out of date.
Yeah.
Yeah, most people use Alpine and just install CA sets from the package manager.
But I guess like eventually that kind of static Docker image is going to become won't work anymore, right?
Yeah.
If you need to do TLS.
Which I guess we do for our Acme solver, right? I think that's the only place.
Does that actually?
Oh no, I guess the controller, cert-manager controller as well. Yeah.
Oh, Venafi,
yeah. Also, any built-in DNS01 solvers because they hit APIs over HTTPS.
Yeah, there's a few places, I guess. Yeah.
So I suppose I'm glad I raised this because this spawned an interesting chat. I suppose my reason for raising it in the first place is that the issue I linked with the out-of-date TZ data packages, like this one, we don't really have anything in place to catch that, right? Like the distroless images are updated somewhat regularly, and we hard code the version that we're going to use by its SHA-256 hash, not by the tag. I understand why. Like I'm all for like forcing a digest rather than a tag, but is there a case to be made for using the tag, given that I suppose if we had automation in place which reported when this was out of date, all we would do is set it to whatever the latest thing is on the tag.
That's what I think we should do. And the same with like all of the libraries that we depend on. We don't update any of our Go mod dependencies.
We could enable GitHub's. We could enable GitHub's dependabot, which tells you automatically if you're using a vulnerable dependency.
That's going off on a tangent, but it's sort of a similar thing, isn't it? There's some linting step that checks we're using the latest base images, the latest libraries.
Yeah.
It's in general security in general, or it's security best practice in general.
I mean, this isn't really like a huge security concern for me still, because it's distroless. Like if it gets out of date, like I don't think there's necessarily a huge security concern. Like, I suppose something can be yanked from the trust store is one, but like the time zone data issue is like North Korea changed its time zone and we won't respect it if a user in North Korea is using cert-manager. Like it's not. That's
can
not
we can we somehow test like the actual built images, our images, because we also have fairly complicated process via which we build them. Like we bundle multiple times and we change like user ID and stuff. Can we just like test those then as well, maybe? And that could also catch if the CI bundles were out of date.
So I suppose that's what the artifact hub scanning would do, right? Is check them. I think as a way forward, maybe the thing for me to do today is raise an issue on cert-manager, maybe hinting that we should change to using a tag rather than a digest for the base, given that I don't see any scenario where that's a huge problem. I'll raise an issue anyway, so we can track this stuff. Maybe not, as with the PCA stuff, I suspect we're not going to rush before 1.4 to start implementing the scanning stuff, but maybe in the future it's a nice thing to have. So I shall raise that after the call.
Okay.
So this is the issue with hosting, is I can't mute myself to type, and I can't type because I'll deafen you all with a mechanical keyboard.
Nice.
So did anyone have anything else that they wanted to chat about?
Yeah, I think the Acme issue is broken. I thought about it for quite some time.
That's
Well, actually,
a good one to raise.
Kind of a big one.
I need to revert my change about the parse chain bit. Like a 3-line change, but we should remove it. Pretty sure.
So what happened? Like, how is
So
it broken?
the Acme issue normally won't return the whole chain, and Let's Encrypt doesn't. At least it doesn't return the root. I think we should remove it anyway.
That's interesting.
It's a change of behavior, I think.
Certbot gives you like 4 different outputs, and one of them is the complete chain, one of them is just the intermediate, and one of them is just the leaf. But I don't know how it constructs them.
It's no good if I just send you PEM data on there.
It wouldn't have Vault broken as well then, because
No, that'd be different because you set that up yourself and we'll have the CA and it'll be private. Because it's public. I just don't think it's right. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. It needs some more, like an actual test though, I think.
Do you have an issue for tracking this?
No. I need to prove it is an issue first, I think, is step 1.
Okay, that's pretty important then.
That's definitely a 1.4 priority.
Blocker. That's a release blocker.
Yeah, I mean, what, code freeze is Friday? Release is 2 weeks away or something. It's fine.
It's not really 1.4 related, but I was saying I just mentioned it in the stand-up this morning. I started changing the Acme HTTP solver to be a controller. This is to make it easier for other people. This is to make it easier for people to route to it through methods that aren't ingress. Rather than having 1 pod per in-flight challenge, it'll just be one single pod that can solve every single in-flight challenge.
what was the extension point going to be? Like, say if someone wants to implement their own like still virtual services, would they deploy another controller basically? Was that the idea?
The idea is that we would have because right now we have an Acme DNS webhook which lets anyone implement their own DNS solver. So what this does is that we'll send to we send to their custom solver the record we want provisioned and the domain to provision it at, and then let them do it. And then once they say they've done it, we just try and validate the challenge. Instead of having it just be DNS, we could extend it to be HTTP as well. We say we want you to solve this challenge at this address. Then they do whatever they need to solve it, which could be like upload a file to a different web server or start a new web server or whatever, and then solve it. But in the meantime, just changing our solver to be a controller because you can set the pod template on our current solver, which means that you can set custom labels. It means that if people are using Istio Virtual Service or Glue or whatever, they can just route to that pod however. Like it's kind of it's a stopgap, but also I don't think we never, like one pod per in-flight challenge, I think is a bad design.
Is there a tracking issue for this? So I can have a read myself.
Don't remember. I definitely picked this up from somewhere. I think there's an overarching issue called, I'll find it, support various virtual service implementations.
Sure.
Yeah, the issue is here, sorry.
Sound. I shall add.
Yeah, and I started implementing the first part of the describe the solution you like.
Sounds good. I couldn't tell if Mayo was talking to us, but I assume he's talking to his family. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
So I've added that issue to the document. Is there anything else you wanted to say about that? The pod stuff?
No, I think I'll just post it for review at some point, and then that will probably trigger a whole bunch of discussion.
Sounds good. Does anyone have anything else they want to raise? No. Look at me, all confident at the beginning that we'd get through it in an hour.
Nothing further from me. Thanks, Ashley.
I reckon we're there then. Yeah, so I guess we'll call it. I'll stop the recording if I can find. There we go.